Hi, good afternoon, Dr. Johnson.
Hello, how are you?
I am great. How are you? Of
Good, thank you for having me.
course, my name's Stephanie Flores. I'm going to be facilitating for you today.
Oh, good, thank you. I was a little panicky.
Oh, no. How can I help you?
Actually, I know how to work with Zoom, no problem. So you just tell me when to start and I will start.
Okay. I'm going to give you like a 10-minute warning, and if that's okay, I'll do it through a chat
Perfect.
so I don't interrupt you.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
And if yeah, I have a watch in front of me also.
Okay. And do
So
you want
are these running till 55?
at 45, and then we take 5 minutes question and answer. So we finish at 10.
Perfect, perfect. Thank
And do
you.
you want to take questions from the audience, or would you prefer to wait until the end?
You know, I'm happy to do that. I really am. I think it's more important to get an answer to them when something occurs to them, if possible,
Okay.
than just to, um, you know.
Okay. I will,
But
as
if you can kind of help me make that decision also along the way, I think.
okay, sure.
You know, I'm really flexible.
Okay, same.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's all about meeting their needs, you know, so that's the whole focus I have, and
Okay.
you know.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, sounds great to me too. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Have about 2 minutes, if that's okay with you. Okay. Okay, Dr. Johnson, if you're ready, I'll go ahead and introduce you and we can get started. Okay.
Perfect, thank you.
So welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. We are excited to have Dr. Carol Johnson with us today. And she is presenting tools that support emergent bilinguals, equity in an MTSS framework. Carol is a bilingual educator and international education officer at Renaissance. She holds a PhD in second language acquisition and teaching, specializing in how people learn second languages. Her years spent teaching English as a second language and French as a foreign language convinced her of the need to stay current on language and literacy research, always working for better outcomes for her students. Welcome, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you. It's always embarrassing, right, to listen to those things, but it's so kind. So thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to share my screen, if that's all right with you. You don't want that part. Everybody can see my screen okay? Okay, thank you. So I'm actually really happy to do this presentation today for you. It's one that I wrote with a colleague who is unable to be here today, although I'm going to tell you a little bit about her because I think it's really important. And this is all about supporting emergent bilinguals and offering tools with dual language programs in mind. Now, if there are people here who are not in a dual language program, I'm hoping that there are ideas here that would also apply to perhaps an English only classroom if that's the situation you're in. But we did write this with the dual language in mind. So I'm going to start. And these are the 4 topics that we've divided this into. So obviously it needs an introduction to give a framework for what's going to be talked about. I'm going to then move into a technique used in language learning all over the world called extensive reading. Then I'm going to step into what would be the next step you could take with this kind of extensive reading program. And finally, at the end, I'm just going to kind of talk about the use of a really good tool across the domains, the language domains, meaning all 4: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So this is actually my colleague who is unable to be here today. As you may imagine by listening to my voice and the fact from the introduction that Spanish was not mentioned, my Spanish is very poor and you wouldn't want to hear me use it. I'm embarrassed when I use it, although I give it my best effort sometimes, to be truthful. Having said that, this is Doris. She is unable to be here. She is what I refer to as my co-brain. We call each other that together. And so I wanted to share her picture with you because she's just fabulous and she can't be here, but she wanted to. I wanted to share that with you. All righty, I'm going to start with an introduction. So when we were putting this together, I have to tell you the first thing we thought about was if we're going to talk about supporting dual language programs, and in this case, we're going to talk about Spanish-English dual language, we realized that it was really critical to get to the standards that educators are responsible for. So these standards, these are the Spanish standards from Texas, and we really, to make this a more hands-on type presentation, decided we couldn't just be all over the place. We had to really narrow in on an example that we thought would tell a story through the presentation. And in this presentation, we decided we would talk about 5th grade. We would narrow this to 5th grade, knowing that some of you are going to have students at lower grades, some of you will have students at upper grades, but we decided and hoped that if we chose 5th grade, it would be kind of in the middle, and the information that we provide for this example would be information that you could generalize to your own personal situation. So these are, in fact, the language arts standards for Spanish from Texas. And you don't want to hear me read them, but we brought them up purposely because we knew if we were going to talk about supporting dual language, we needed to look at the standards for both languages. And there's so much text on the screen. We wanted to give you a chance just to kind of glance at it. We imagine you probably already know these, but wanted to show it anyway. And then we know that it's important, then we're going to have to go to the English language arts standards. And these also are from Texas, as you are likely very familiar with them. By the way, I happen to live in Tucson, Arizona. So for me, I have to catch up on learning things when I'm lucky enough to engage with educators in another state. So that's why I don't have these memorized personally. But at any rate, these are the English language arts standards for grade 5. Also, again, they're yours. And what I love about these standards that I don't always see in different states is the fact that there's an entire section that is honestly open about, wait a minute, these are standards, yes, and we are talking in this presentation today, English learners, we call them mostly emerging bilinguals now in the field, even though we see a lot of ELLs still, and I know that you call them emerging bilinguals in Texas too. But the beauty of this is I've highlighted out of this, all of this text, something that's really important. And that is, if we want students who are still learning English in a dual language program to achieve English language arts standards, we have to understand off the bat that proficiency in English affects that ability. Okay, so that's why this standard is up there. And then in the second half of that standard, what is so critical, and again, I don't get to see very often in many state standards like this, but there is the recognition of the importance of the first language in the achievement of English. Okay, so for me, these are fabulous standards, and I'm very happy to work from these. Now, 5th grade's big, so to go even more narrow, we decided we would have 2 sample 5th grade students. So on the left, we have an emergent bilingual, Spanish-English emergent bilingual, who is at TELPAS 2. On the right, the sample student is an emergent bilingual Spanish-English at TELPAS 3. And those distinctions matter, as we all know, when we're talking about English language arts and the achievement in those. So for TELPAS 2, I have a very brief summary. Again, all of this is off your websites. And what it describes on the left is what can a student at TELPAS 2 do? You know, well, you can see their intermediate level. What I highlighted here that I think is really important concerning this extensive reading that I'm going to talk about is what is in this summary so beautifully, and that is in intermediate ELLs have the ability to read and understand. Read and understand. That is so critical, and they've put it in your website. So I love that. And then it gives a description of the kind of text, the level of text, if you will, that a student at TELPAS 2 can likely read and understand. Let me say it that way. On the right-hand side, I have a description of TELPAS 3, a very global description of the reading ability for the student here. And again, notice clearly delineated in the description is read and understand. Now, I know for most of us that seems like a no-brainer, but for every one of us that have been language learners and language teachers, I put money on the fact that we've all been exposed to texts that we cannot read and understand. It's very commonly done. We're given texts with a dictionary, and dictionaries with a text are really great. We do need them, there's no question about it. But getting a text that's the right level for the student to read and understand is so important. And I'm not sharing with you anything that you don't already know. All right, so that's my introduction. Then I want to turn to extensive reading, and I'm going to talk about it in English and Spanish. So here's where some of the research comes from on extensive reading, but here's what I like in that it's a really good description of why you would want to consider doing it. And it's simply extensive reading develops good reading habits, builds language and knowledge, and encourages reading. You know, for me, that's great. I mean, it's absolutely great. For me, for my students, all the time, those are things that I want. I want them to be building both language and knowledge, and I want them to like doing it because we all do more of what we like doing. But I think it's important to share with you more. I want you to get a sense of what the research is telling us about extensive reading. So I've collected pieces of research here for you. And I'm going to start on the left column and then go to the right. On the left, the first citation I have is from E.D. Hirsch, who has nothing to do with dual language programs. Let's just be candid. And he rarely has anything to do with anything other than English. But the statement that I like from him here helps frame what we need to know about working with our emerging bilinguals. And that is what we often see as the achievement gap is really a knowledge gap and a language gap. So anytime any of us are asked to achieve in a language we are not yet fully fluent in and produce some kind of information we're not yet fully deep in, there's a gap. And that's what happens for all students, for all humans. Now, also from him, though, is his research for actually first and second language learners, citing that vocabulary size, meaning how many words we know, is the single most reliable correlate to reading ability. Now, it's not everything. He's not saying that. It's the single most reliable correlate. And in extensive reading, what we want to do is provide students with opportunities to read that they understand, just like from the standards that we saw earlier from your state standards. So the thing about vocabulary, as we all know, that makes it so important is that it's reflective of concepts, background knowledge, etc. The more vocabulary we have, the deeper the vocabulary we have, the more knowledge and language we have. Now, I've also included the citation below about knowledge. And that's because as a student of language myself, and a teacher of languages myself, as I was introduced, both French and French and English, what I didn't understand when I was a learner or when I was teaching was the critical nature of some kind of knowledge about the topic that we're reading about. So I'm going to give you my own example. When I was working on my master's in French, I studied at a university in Quebec, and it was in French-speaking classes, right? And as I was still a learner of French, the class that I was in was given a book to read about the history of Quebec. Now, the text level may have been appropriate to my language level, but I have no knowledge of the history of Quebec. And therefore, it was nearly impossible for me to really get much out of the book. It took so much to go back and look up cities and history and figures and people that although I had enough everyday vocabulary and globally vocabulary for it, I did not have enough knowledge. And that's why I wanted to make sure and put this point in here. So next point I have here is something we all know, and that is, this is fabulous research, and it is reading in the first language. Comprehension in the first language is a predictor of how we will do in the second language. That's why dual language programs are just so fabulous. They're just the best. So now let's go on the right side of the screen and look at really implementation. What does the research tell us about implementing an extensive reading, let's call it program, technique, methodology? And what it says is no surprise, and that is that comprehension improves in students when they read just above and just below their current language ability. Now, those of you that have a background in second language acquisition are probably familiar with Krashen, and Krashen's work is that I plus or minus 1. So I put it in there just in case, so for a reference point. But that's really what this is about. Reading grows, comprehension grows when students get the opportunity to read just above and just below their language ability, what they already know. And finally, this is a really important part that I added in for the early learners. Remember, the example I gave is a TELPAS 2 and a TELPAS 3. So TELPAS 2 is an earlier learner in the acquisition of English. But what the research shows for earlier learners, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Sorry. What the research shows for the earlier learners is that listening while reading, reading while listening, seems to be even more beneficial than simply silent reading. Now, that would be the student at TELPAS 1, TELPAS 2, for example. And the reason the researchers believe this to be true is that they are, in fact, still developing the phonology of the language they're still developing. And so for that reason, it gives them more exposure to academic language, higher levels of language structure, etc., in books that you might not get in the classroom every day. The other thing that they have from this research they have revealed is that older, higher proficiency students actually don't benefit from that. And that is because they have actually developed the sound system, the prosody, etc., and they have it in place. So in fact, for higher proficiency students, like an advanced student, like the second student I showed at TELPAS 3, it actually interferes with their comprehension. So I thought it was really important to bring that up. And the way I kind of look at this myself is that I either, as a full-grown native speaker of English, educated, I either listen to a book or read a book, but I don't do them at the same time. And that's kind of an explanation for why.
Dr. Johnson,
Yes, ma'am.
you had a question in the chat referencing back to the vocabulary size. The question was, does it need to be vocabulary in English or Spanish or both languages?
So, emergent bilinguals are interesting. It's by language. So if you're reading in English, you need to know these words in English. If you're reading in Spanish, you need to know these words in Spanish. However, this presentation doesn't go into translanguaging. I just want you to know that. And I have just a very minimal reference to cognates, for example. So I happen to think that this is one of those areas where it requires a really good presentation to show, yes, I agree with both. I think it's what you have in both is what we always use. Okay, but if you're reading an English book, you need to be able to understand enough words in English, have enough words in English. And if there are cognates, then that handles it too. Same thing with with Spanish. Okay,
you have one more. Would you like to take it now?
I would be happy to.
Okay, what about an older student, say 3rd through 5th grade, that still doesn't have the decoding skills to access these books? Is reading while listening beneficial to them?
It actually is if they are, and especially if you go with really lower level books that help actually, there's not so much text on the screen with them, lower level books where they can actually track and pick up another level of sight words, if you will. So does that make sense to that? And when I say that, does that make sense to whoever asked that? Okay. Yeah, it really does. And there are lots of books that are digital books that have very low level emergent reader sight level, books that are really good for helping with decoding, ironically. So that's how I'll say it. All right. Thank you for these questions. It helps me give you more than I had, originally written into this. So thank you. All right. So now let's do a little bit more about extensive reading with these two students. Now, remember, I gave you TELPAS 2 and TELPAS 3. But by those descriptions, those really are not reading levels. Those are not enough to go and connect directly to books at specific levels. So I would like for you to assume that each of these students has taken a reading test. Okay, and from this reading test, I know that the student in TELPAS 2 has a grade equivalent reading range of 1.5 first grade 5th month to 2.5 second grade 5th month. And now look at the one on the right for the student on the right at TELPAS 3. Notice he has a higher reading level. This is in English. We're starting with English on this one. Okay, I want you to see that he has a higher reading level, and yet they're in the same grade. So we want to make sure that what is right for the student on the left is probably going to be different than right for the student on the right. And that's the thing about extensive reading that ties directly to the description in your reading levels for English in your standards. And that is, extensive reading involves each learner reading lots of material independently and silently at the right level. Notice that right level, read and understand, all of that keeps coming back to us. And that's because it is critical and we all know it, but implementing it is not as easy sometimes as we may have thought. Now with today's technology, that's changed. And that's a really important thing that I'm happy that that's what I'm sharing with you today. So anyway, 2 different reading levels, 2 different English language proficiency levels. We need to meet both their needs. So I imagined that I was the teacher for both of these students, and I named the first student Isabel just so that I would have a name in mind, so that it wasn't just some abstract. I wanted that to be my student. And I have on the top of the screen grade equivalent. I have the sample I'm using. I left that up there just on this one slide to show you. This is the sample I'm using, something called Myon. There are other options out there, but I am using this as the samples all the way through. I want you to know that. All right. And remember, Isabel reads as a first grade 5th month to a second grade 5th month. So notice the three books I've chosen for her, and I'm giving you the grade equivalents of these books. These are the covers of the books. Okay, notice I am just above, right? Just above, just within range of her reading level. I actually didn't go below her reading level on this, but I notice I'm within that reading level for her with these books. And I also want you to know I picked these books out with her at this time for this presentation, knowing what she likes. Okay, because wanting students to read more is dependent upon them liking what they read. So I want to show you the inside of the books that I picked for Isabel in English. Okay, this is the first one about the ballerina. And even though she's at that lower proficiency level, she has a lot of knowledge about this topic. And that's the reason I like to pick books with students that I ask them about what do they like. I never ask students, what do you like to read? I never ask students that because I learned painfully myself as a teacher that when I asked them that, if they were struggling, they would always say, I don't, which led to, now what do I do? You know, as a teacher, we've all been through that. So I asked, what do you like? And went and looked for books at her level with her for that purpose. She likes ballet. She loves ballet. She's got a lot of knowledge about ballet, and that's why. But what I want to show you here that I think is really important is that, yes, it's a topic she likes. Yes, it's a topic she will spend time with, meaning a book she will spend time with. But I want you to see the grammatical structures in this. Never mind the low frequency vocabulary that she will be building, right? Look at this. Look at the if clauses. If I were a ballerina, I would practice turnout. You know, look at that. There's a phrasal verb there. Notice that. I would turn my hips, knees, and feet outward. Notice all of that. The modals built into that structure automatically are really important for students. And as a second language learner, getting modals correct is so difficult. It's not one of those structures that you can memorize directly the rules and then use them. You have to hear them enough in the patterns, and that's what you get out of books like this that have the auditory that go with it. And in fact, I gave myself a little reminder down there that this is something that she would be listening to. Notice I put a headphone there too to remind myself so I wouldn't forget to say that. This is the second book, a sample of a page from the second book. Again, this is something that she loves, so that's why this book is appropriate to her. She will want to spend time with it. Okay, so she's scared to play the piano in front of others. Notice the structure you get there. I mean, it's just amazing. Structure about something you're around something that you're interested in never gets better, ever. And so that's why I want to give you that page. This one, no, deer have fawns. Notice this is even actually more academic vocabulary if you consider science. Fawns are born in the spring. They have reddish coats. Notice that reddish, that structure that you get there that you just can't teach from a language textbook. It's not possible. But these books provide opportunities for students to engage with language that is beyond what any teacher can do in a classroom in a reasonable amount of time. It's just not possible. So that's why I wanted to show you these books. Now, the second thing is, in this situation, all of these books are followed, almost all, there are a couple of exceptions, are followed with comprehension quizzes. 5 multiple choice quizzes for the student, just so the student gets a sense of, did I understand what I read? And you can see down on the bottom of the screen there, you can see there were 5 questions. You can see they're in green. She got them correct. This is just feedback for the student. How the student did isn't a report for teachers. You would want something like that. But this is, in fact, you know, simply an issue of students need to know this. And again, comprehension is what makes the difference. Remember, we're talking about reading and understanding. So this is how the student can find out. So now I'm going to take Isabel, because she's in a dual language program, to books in Spanish. And again, I went back with her and said, what do you like? What do you want to read about? No, and I picked books that are around the 5th grade level because she's a 5th grader and she's an absolutely typical student in a 5th grade dual language program with wonderful, beautiful Spanish, all of that. And we want to take advantage of that because with that, not only do we have biliteracy coming, of course, but she has such an opportunity, just like the second student will, to build even more language and knowledge that will affect how well she does in English. So let's look at these books. These books to me are stunning. They're just stunning in the language and the complexity of the language. Notice the cognates here. I love to bring that up in this because that really relates to the question that came earlier. Notice this is the opportunity to build more cognates in the dominant language that will transfer over to the vocabulary that can be used in the second language. I mean, this is amazing. That's why I love dual language. Here's another one. This is also on butterflies. She loved butterflies, picked books like that. These also have audio to them if the student wants to hear them. And again, audio for someone who is learning Spanish is fabulous. They may not want to, being at this grade level in Spanish, have any reason to do that, but I wanted to share that with you. And finally, this one I like because it's like a, cartoon book, a graphic novel, so kind of thing. And it's again, a topic that she likes. Again, there are quizzes in the Spanish books. Now, this one is interesting, and Doris and I did this intentionally. Notice on this quiz, she got 3 out of 5 wrong. So that was we needed to show that to you because we need to talk about, if you're talking about comprehension, that doesn't really necessarily mean she didn't understand what she read. It can also mean it's been a while since she read the book and she hadn't remembered what she read. It's really important to keep all those things in mind. So when we're talking about comprehension and reading, of course, we all understand that we don't mean every single book has to be held to 100%. We mean the growth comes from comprehension in most along the way. So I wanted to share that with you. Okay, this is Isaac. Isaac, remember, reads at a higher level. So he has 2.5 to 3.5 in English. And these are the books he was interested in. Okay. So, and notice again for him now, they're just above and just below his range. Just want to share that with you. This also is the opportunity to build low frequency vocabulary. So Rosa and her family lived on her grandparents' farm in Pine Level, Alabama. They had fruit, pecan, and walnut trees. Pecan and walnut trees are not likely, those words are not, pecan and walnut, are not likely to appear in language textbooks. It's just language textbooks are meant to give you everything foundational you need. But going further requires exposure to really authentic language, authentic text, whatever the language is, either way. Okay, so I wanted to share this with you. For me, these are really, really important things come in. It's that language, again, that can be developed in the second language with the opportunity and exposure to it. Creaks is a very low frequency word. Very low frequency. And again, these are words that we all know across languages, native speakers know. We want second languages learners, emerging bilinguals to have the opportunity to add exposure to this kind of low frequency vocabulary also, not low level, low frequency. This one is great for building knowledge. Great, this was his interest. And so that's why I put it in there for him. It's at an English level that's appropriate to him. And then here I have a graphic novel. This is also somebody that he is interested in. So these are all based on the student's reading level and interest and what they're interested in. Again, a quiz. I want you to know that this quiz in English I took, and I got these 2 questions wrong. I want you to know that. And I want you to know why. Again, this is back to always having context for what's going on with students. The reason is this book on Cesar Chavez has a lot of detail in it, a lot. And after I read the book and came back and did a quiz, I didn't remember all the details. So I got things wrong. Did I understand it when I read it? Of course I did. So again, keep that in mind for your students too. If you're in a position to give them books that have features with quizzes, etc., keep that in mind. All right, now let's look at Isaac's books for Spanish. Okay, and you can see they're higher level books for him. It all makes sense. He's a terrific student. And we're going back to stuff that he loves. Notice he's back on the same topic as in English, Benjamin Franklin. You know, there's a book for him in Spanish on that too, that's at his level, that's appropriate to him. This is, he is interested, this student actually, and these are real students that we actually knew, I want you to know. So that's why it was easy to come up with examples. This student is very interested in civil rights, in the law and history. You can tell by the books he's interested in. great books in both languages on that. He's also very interested in technology, very interested in that. And so we looked for books for technology for him too. So covering their interests and their reading levels. Again, take the quiz. All the things you want. So I think the thing that's important here to remember is that because of the way we're selecting books, we're in fact building vocabulary and building knowledge. And both of those are critical to building reading, both of them. So I wanted to do that before moving on. All right. Any questions? Everybody's good? What a nice group. You guys are being so kind. Thank you. So the next step then is we want to go one step further and we want to talk about, well, how can we use this same technique for science? How can we build in the content areas using the same technique? And that's what I'm going to show you. We again have to go to standards, right? So we went to 5th grade standards. We looked at what it said in English. We're going to work off this standard, just so you know, identify and compare the physical characteristics of the sun, earth, and moon. Now we did the same thing in Spanish. Okay, so notice they're identical. Just wanted to make sure that we checked everything. We wanted to be really purposeful in everything we were doing and supporting all of the expectations for students in dual language programs. We wanted to cover all of those variables that we could think of in a presentation of this length. So we're back to our same students. Okay, we know the same things about them as before. We know their TELPAS level, we know their reading levels, and we're going to now talk about showing them how to use or giving them the opportunity to build knowledge and language, vocabulary, etc., that will support them in the science areas. So Isabel on the left, I have books for her in English, just so you can see they're within her reading range. And on the right, I have books in Spanish. These are all books that will cover that standard that I just showed you in Spanish. You can see the definite difference in the reading levels. There's no surprise, we know that about her. But we want to make sure that we cover her where she's at. Okay. This is Isaac. Notice there's no change in the books on the right because they're appropriate for grade level Spanish. And they're just in Spanish. They're absolutely perfect. His English books are at a higher level. Now, the beauty of this is with Isabel's books starting at that lower level, as she reads more of those, as you can imagine, she will then move up in her reading level too. As he reads more of his, he will also move up in his reading level in English too. So that's why it's so important that we know the student's reading level. We don't just know their language proficiency level. It's not enough. We need a way to have the reading level of the student so that we can do the best we can to make sure we get to them books, texts, etc., that are comprehensible to them, that they can read and understand. So I wanted to give you a sense of that. It's not deep, it's not complex, but I knew that you would be able to transfer, generalize from the reading language arts to the science if I showed that to you. But I want to go one step further. And again, I'm showing you a specific product that has this opportunity to do it. Just because it's the one that I'm familiar with. But I also want you to know that if you have something else that does this, then you will get how you would transfer this knowledge. And what happens with a really good system like this is it will offer the opportunity to support all of the language domains. So it will have tools in it that will allow you to do listening. Okay, so it's important that it gives that opportunity for students that definitely need that. It's important that it gives the opportunity, if possible, in one system to let them record their own voice, to let the teacher hear them, to give the teacher auditory messages about the book that they can convey to the teacher. All of those things are really important when you consider teachers have a lot of students in the classroom and they can't listen to every student all the time, do reading, but that's why these features in a product are really important. Certainly for reading, you need a lot of books, you need a lot of choices, you need to have a leveling system in them, you need to know a placement system, you need a comprehension check, you need all of those things that support the fact that you're sure that your students are reading and understanding. And finally, you need a way to build written projects in. So you need to be able to give students the opportunities to first do the receptive skills, meaning listening and reading, so that they get a lot more input into their translanguaging system. And following that, that's when you want to give them the opportunity to produce output, writing, particularly, and speaking. And so that's why this is an example that I'm using today. I think it's really important that any system do this, but there are others that do. And of course, that's, you will know that about your own situation. Finally, and I'm biased, I know that system, let's be honest, and that system to me is the best. But there are others. I want to be totally honest about that. So I just wanted to give you an example here of what it would look like in a system perhaps that's easy to use, where you can record your own voice. So this is inside one of those books on science. You can see I have a little arrow down there to show the recording spot for the student. You can also see actually the prompt is in Spanish. This one's being navigated in Spanish. So you can see something that's easy to use is critical. And that's why I wanted to give you this example. I wanted to also show you finally at the end that you can see all my stuff I was looking up. That's embarrassing. At any rate, you can see that there's the opportunity for the books to give you prompts on what activities you could build for your students, so you don't have to create everything yourself, right? So I just wanted to give you that too, that a lot of the books come with something after them, aftermatter, if you will, that gives you ideas where you don't have to come up with everything yourself. So anyway, I want to wrap up now that you know my whole life. I would like to kind of wrap it up and then take questions from you or comments, anything, and share with you that this is the perspective that I always take, whether I'm teaching or learning or, just talking to myself, to be candid. It's that I really believe that the right tools and the right people make all the difference. It takes both. So just a tool in isolation is just another tool, but a tool with the right dual language teachers, with the right colleagues, with the right everything makes the difference for our students. And that's what this is all about, trying to make a difference in the lives of our students. So I thank you for spending this time with me and allowing me to be here with you. Nobody? It's okay. I'm all right with that. I don't want to try to force people.
It seems like they're pretty quiet. There's no questions in the chat either.
Hi, Mrs. Johnson. This is Miss Moreno. I do not have a question, but I have a comment. I loved your presentation, and I loved the reading while listening audiobooks. That's something that we do not have in our school, and it would be great for us bilingual teachers. By the way, I am a second grade teacher, and one of the things that we encounter when we have to select books, either in, I would say either both languages, Spanish and English, is that our kids, they do not have a wide range of vocabulary in their own language.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a problem that we encounter, that when we are trying to select books, we always have that thing that, we don't really know their Spanish vocabulary. They come to you, they speak Spanish, but they don't have, I am not going to say academic vocabulary, because, kids that age, they don't, but their words, you tell them to tell you a story, and they and they would say things like that thing that my mom uses, or that thing that my, you know, they don't even know they don't even know the Spanish language. And we are okay when they are translating, you know, when they talking in Spanglish, that's great for us, you know, because you can use at least one language. But sometimes, you know, we have a newcomers that, depending on where they come from, mostly from Mexico, they have a great vocabulary, especially if it's the center of Mexico. But if they come to you from areas like the border, their vocabulary is really, really not very wide. And I think it's a great idea, but sometimes we have that problem. We have the problem of selecting, you know, those books that, you know, they will mean something to them in either language.
You know, I really appreciate bringing this up. I want to tell you this, because the thing about this system that I showed you is that there is actually the opportunity for both languages for you to pick lower level books that will start the building of academic vocabulary. Do you know what I'm saying? So you can, like, even for example, the books, there are like kindergarten books, emergent reader books, so below kindergarten level books in English and Spanish that build academic vocabulary, that start to do that, which is, they're really good books. I have a friend online who Linda, if you have a chance to show them the emergent, you know, when you type in emergent reader, those books they're not, I just wanted to share that with a friend online. Those are amazing books to start to build academic vocabulary because they're nonfiction.
Yes.
Okay. They're really fabulous and they work really, really well. And then I'm going to share with you, this is just a personal story. I'll just tell you that. So I come from a family with no education, just so you know. And the challenge of vocabulary was mine my entire life, all the way through going through school. And to this day, I still have less of a vocabulary than someone who comes from my husband, who comes from an educated family, just so you know. And so I love the question that you're asking, because it seems as though the more you can offer that for your students, let them listen and build their own oral vocabulary that way, you'll change their lives. You will change their lives long term.
Yeah.
That was a great question.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Johnson, did you want to stay around for some potential questions, or would you like to go ahead and wrap up the session?
If they don't have questions, I would be happy to wrap up the session. I don't want to make them stay either. But I do want to thank you for having me.
Yes.
This is one of my favorite things, kids.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, and to the participants as well. Thank you for joining us. And then your next session will start at 2:00. So we will see you there.
Thank you, everyone.
Dr. Johnson.
Bye.
Bye-bye.